Good morning, everybody. It's great seeing you. We're going to be in Mark chapter 13 today. We're talking about things that are difficult today. Like all that good stuff. That's for you. Like that's so Mark chapter 13. We read it last week. Did I have like a intriguing question last week? I can't remember. I don't think I did. So that's Mark chapter 13. I have a video for us, and it's about the siege and battle of Jerusalem in AD 70 or CE 70, whichever one you want to call it. And so what's interesting about that is I think that that's kind of what Jesus is talking about. He's kind of prophesying about that because he could see that coming. So I have a video. It's about 15 minutes long that we will watch. We will watch that here in a second. It's not the best video. There were much better videos, but they were an hour long, and they were. Yeah, like, thank you. Like, listen, these were good videos. And there was just a lot of ancillary details as to why it was an hour long that didn't really pertain to this. And so we're going to watch it here in a second. But so Mark chapter 13, it's easy to forget where we were and just start reading Mark chapter 13 like we're in a like this is the first time we've ever read anything like this. Like, you got to remember everything we've talked about getting up to this point. You know, we've been talking a lot about power. We've been talking a lot about the power of Herod, power of the Pharisees, power of how the disciples have wanted power, right? Jesus has now reenacted basically the Maccabean revolt as he comes in on Palm Sunday, and he even cleanses the temple. And he doesn't cleanse the temple from the sins of them, but he cleanses it from the sins of us. Like he goes in there, he does the whole thing with the fig tree. That's important too, because he talks about it again in 15, that the fig tree is kind of showing that this may not be the people of God's, Israel's time. That's kind of coming to a waning end. And we saw last week, we talked about the parable of the tenants, where the people, they're going to come and kill the son. Remember that? Kill the son. We talked about paying the imperial tax. And he keeps pointing out their hypocrisy. He's like, you guys sure procured that coin really quick with that thing on it. If you were really serious about this, that coin with the head of the idolatry to Caesar on it would have been really hard for you to find. And then he starts talking about the marriage of the resurrection, that whole sense of protecting people was kind of that whole point of marriage. It wasn't about doing the right thing to get to heaven. And then we start talking about the greatest commandment, and the commandments are really summed up in love God and love your neighbor. All right, love God, love your neighbor. And then we end with, and this is, I think, is incredibly important. Before we go to 13, we end with this that we ended last week with Jesus talking about watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes, be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogue, places of honor. They devour widows' houses and make show of lengthy prayers. Like, fascinating stuff there. Like, I love that terminology. The reason why I love it is it's strong. They devour widows' homes. Because that's for me, I see sniveling people looking for power that are doing that all the time. It's easy to point out politicians, but it's a little harder, but you can see it with like landlords being scummy, you know? You see it when the economy drives down and people are having a hard time affording their homes, and so they buy it out from underneath them to make them rent it later, you know? Like that's, and they peacock around town, like, look at the great investments that I've done, right? Like there's a special place, right? A special place.
You wouldn't think there being church leaders in there.
No church leaders at all. No church leaders at all. Like we're all a sacred bunch, you know, none of us have done anything wrong ever, you know, like that's, no, church leaders are in there like crazy. Like that's, like when you look at, you know, what's happened over the years and everything that's yeah, like that's, I try to be aware of that constantly, where even like asking for money in certain ways that's more persuasive than maybe it should be, you know, like that's doing things to trick people out of their money. I talked about that church in Seattle a couple of weeks ago in church, you know, like that's that's one example, but you know, it's one of these things that especially me and my ilk, I can see where I'm participating in it all the time. And Jesus then offers the juxtaposition that then shows the widow who gives out of her poverty and not out of her wealth. So we have all these guys that are obviously going to be giving lots of money, but she is now giving everything, because I think it's this gift of kind of all she has. Now, here's what's funny. I don't think this was ever intended to be this way. So I'm about to talk garbage about, you know, like my old Sunday school teachers and stuff like that. But this story about the widow's offering is always kind of taught like in Sunday school. It's like, oh, she just gave it all to the church, you know? And then it's almost like the moral lesson of it is you should give it all too. Maybe sometimes, but like Joanne's giving me eyes of like, yeah, that's probably not good, right? Like because you can see it then, right? Like that's like, it's so easy. It's like, oh, just be like, I could see me standing up here, you know, before seeing all this and going, give it all, you know, over there so that I can make sure that I have a good retirement. You know, like we won't say that, but you know, all of those things like that, like it's all kind of tied in together. And what I'm saying is that this whole thing is messy. It's all messy. It's actually why on Sunday I did the offering thing like I did it, thanking everyone for supporting the daily ministry here so that we can do funerals and things like that. Because the reality is, this is kind of hard to say in like an eloquent way. The church is what we want it to be. The church is what we want it to be. So if we want a place to gather and worship, to have Bible studies, to do different things, to all of that, we support that, you know, to be a place for all those things. And so we kind of make it what we want it to be, that type of thing. And that's fine. That's fine. I have like what I start having problems with is when we start denying that that's what we want and we're saying that we're just giving it to whatever while it's enriching someone else. I think that's what it's talking about there. Does that make sense? It's sticky, but everything in life is sticky, right? Like that's just the way it goes. But remember where that conversation is happening. It's happening at the temple. Okay? Now also, remember, you have to put on you got to remember what is happening around everything here. Are times in Jerusalem peaceful or very contentious? Like they're very contentious, right? Like Rome has occupied them over there. We already see how Jesus has walked into Jerusalem with basically shouts of revolution from people, right? With shouts of insurrection, with shouts of like, we need to kick the Romans out, like all that stuff. Like, so this is kind of a hotbed everywhere. And that's important to understand as we go into 13. So also the important thing to understand is that we're about to talk about the sacking of Jerusalem by Rome. Okay? That happened 40 to 60 years after Jesus walked around. Not long, not long. So when they're putting together these stories and putting it in a book, they're probably making sure that they talk about that. Okay? So we're going to watch a video about the sacking of Jerusalem. It's not as good as I wanted to. It sanitizes it a little bit. What I want you to pay attention to is the times, okay? The guy in this video, he just blows over something, but he actually says the amount of time. It makes it seem like, oh, this happened the next day, but it was actually like 5 years. So he says 5 years. So you got to think about that as you're listening to it. So pay attention to the time. So here we go. Oh, I got to get on the screen too.
In the spring of the year 70 CE, Titus marches his legions from the coastal plain to Jerusalem. He's boiling with anger. It has been 4 years and the Roman army has not succeeded in suppressing the stubborn revolt that broke out in Judea.
Yeah. Good job.
The Jews fight courageously for every piece of land. Even the esteemed commander Vespasian, Titus' father, could not defeat them. Now, after his father's appointment to emperor, it's Titus' turn to manage the campaign. He commands the most powerful war machine in the world, tens of thousands of trained legionnaires equipped with advanced weapons, sophisticated breaching tools, and lethal artillery. Against the mighty Roman army stands a small force of fighters who will fight for their freedom until their last drop of blood. The final battle of the Great Revolt against Rome begins. It will be a battle that will never be forgotten. In the dark of night, Titus brings up his soldiers from 3 directions to Jerusalem. As dawn breaks on the 14th of Nisan, the eve of Passover, the residents of Jerusalem awaken to a sight that makes their blood run cold. 60,000 Roman soldiers, thirsty for war, surround the city from every direction. Only now, when the Romans stand at the gates of the city, does the tragedy caused by the civil war raging in the city become clear. In clashes between the various factions, whole sections of Jerusalem were destroyed. Stores of food that could have provided vital provisions during the fighting and siege went up in flames and vanished. Too late, the rebels joined forces against the true enemy. What they lack in weaponry and soldiers will be reinforced by acts of bravery and unrestrained daring. The Jews take the initiative and respond quickly. They attack ferociously before the Romans take up positions. The surprised Romans scatter in all directions. Titus himself escapes by the skin of his teeth. Before the Romans manage to recover, the Jews retreat behind the mighty defenses of the walls of Jerusalem. These walls are Titus' main problem. Jerusalem is built on a hill and surrounded by 3 fortified walls, each stronger than the other. To breach such a wall, Titus must raise huge earthen ramps and bring up siege towers and battering rams to breach it. In excavations conducted in Jerusalem, in the Russian compound, remains of the 3rd wall have been found. It is the outer wall of the ancient city. We have here testimony to the battle. We found more than 70 catapult stones right here at the front of the wall, so that we know a battle took place here. The number and density of the catapult stones and their locations are basically the testimony that there was a battle here during the Roman period, dated according to the potsherds. The evidence enabled us to conclude that we are dealing with a section of the 3rd wall through which the Romans penetrated Jerusalem. With these huge catapult stones, Titus soldiers bombarded the Jewish defenders, thus ensuring that they would not disturb the builds of the ramping. Each of these stones weighs about 26 kilograms and flew at a speed of tens of kilometers per hour. When a stone like this crashed into the wall, it was better not to be there. Under heavy artillery cover, the iron rams climbed to the top of the wall and pierced it. The noise is deafening. The largest battering ram of all, nicknamed Nikon, the victor, was the first to breach the wall. The Roman soldiers burst into Beit Zeta neighborhood. They slaughter the residents without mercy and set the entire neighborhood on fire. Within a few days, the second wall also falls. The Jewish defenses begin to disintegrate. Titus renews the attack and advances his soldiers to the internal wall, the strongest wall of Jerusalem, known as the First Wall. He concentrates most of his efforts here at the Antonia Fortress. The Antonia is the largest, strongest fortress in Jerusalem. It was built by Herod to the north of the Temple Mount in order to control the temple. Titus' plan was well thought out. The moment the Antonia falls, the temple will fall. And when the temple falls, the Jews will lose all hope and Jerusalem will finally fall into his hands. But nothing prepared him for what happens next. In a daring action, the soldiers of John of Giscala succeed in digging a tunnel under the earthen ramp opposite the Antonia, setting fire to its foundations and toppling it together with the soldiers to the ground. At the same time, Simon Bar Giora attacks the ramp opposite the first wall and sets it on fire. Hundreds of Roman soldiers are killed and wounded. All at once, the Roman attack is halted and the entire Roman army is driven out of the city. Stunned by the failure, Titus gathers his commanders urgently and decides to change tactics. If it is not possible to break into the city, he will surround it from without and starve the Jews to death. In a record time of only 3 days, Titus builds a giant siege wall around Jerusalem, a choke ring 7 kilometers long that effectively blocks off all supply lines. Now, starvation sets in to cruelly afflict the city. Affluent people scour the gutters to find scraps of food, and small children whose parents have starved to death wander the streets in search of a piece of bread. The tension in the city grows. Those who are left with a little food eat in secret. Others try to evade the zealots and escape from the city. Most of those who try to flee are caught by the Romans and crucified on wooden beams around the city walls. Fatigue and starvation weaken the Jewish fighters. This is Titus' chance to deal the crushing blow to Jerusalem. The Roman army is concentrated on one task: to conquer Antonia Fortress and break through to the temple. The Jews tried to prevent the capture of the Temple Mount and sabotage the building of the ramps. They shot flaming arrows, threw giant stones, and poured boiling oil on the head of the Roman soldiers. In the Temple Mount sifting project, iron arrowheads were found. These arrowheads were used for catapult fire. Catapults are machines for shooting arrows, and they bombarded the walls with such force that even the bravest of the Jewish fighters could not withstand. After fierce battles, Titus' soldiers gained control of the Antonia. On the 17th of Tammuz, Titus commands them to destroy the mighty citadel down to its foundations. This day, on which according to tradition the city was breached, is commemorated as a day of mourning on the Jewish calendar. The temple service ceased completely, and during the following 3 weeks, the days between the straits, the Jews would struggle in bloody face-to-face battles in the courtyards of God's temple. The battering rams breached the western walls of the Temple Mount. Ladders are leaned against the remains of the wall, and the Roman soldiers stream en masse into the temple courtyard. It seems that the campaign is drawing to a close, but what happens next is totally inconceivable. When the Jews realize that the temple is in real danger, they shake off all feelings of hunger and weakness. Thousands of citizens, women, men, elders, and youth, everyone who can hold a weapon, join the fighters. Together as one man, they fall upon the Romans and block the way to the temple with their bodies. Only one weapon can beat the fire of faith that burns in the hearts of the Jewish fighters, the burning fire of torches. And thus, on the night of the 9th of Av, Titus sets fire to the gates that surround the Temple Mount. On their way to the temple, the Romans burst through, killing, stabbing, and trampling everyone in their path. The blood flows on the colorful stone floors of the Temple Mount as bodies of the slain pile high. The flames quickly spread and approach the entrance to the temple. A moment before it goes up in flames, Titus gathers his commanders for a final consultation to determine the fate of the temple. Josephus claims that Titus opposed destroying the temple, which in his eyes was the glory of human creation. According to Josephus, the fire was caused by accident by a Roman soldier who inadvertently tossed a burning torch into the sanctuary. But most scholars do not believe this is really true. The anger over the many casualties caused by the Jews and the understanding that as long as the temple stood, the Jews would continue to fight, decided the temple's fate. Let them see and fear. On the 9th of Av, towards evening, Titus gave the order, and the following day, the 10th of Av, his soldiers set fire to the sanctuary. The temple that had been the source of inspiration, faith, ethics, and righteousness for the Jewish people and all humanity for centuries, now went up in flames. The cries of pain of the Jews rose up to the heavens. Titus commands the burning of the lower city. In the upper city, the rebels continue to fight stubbornly for another month, until the Romans take control of it too and set it ablaze. The charred remains of fire and destruction discovered by Professor Nachman Avigadad in what was once an opulent neighborhood tell the story of the complete destruction of Jerusalem. Chilling testimony to the last moments of the city is found here, between layers of ruins and ashes. The severed arm of a young woman with a spear alongside it. It appears that she too was unable to escape to the rebels' final refuge, the underground drainage channel. We're inside the drainage channel, where the rebels hid 2,000 years ago. The last of the Jerusalem residents hid in this tunnel, here, where we stand. Suffocating darkness and terrible fear surrounded them. The Romans searched for them, found them, broke through the ceiling of the tunnel, and killed everyone. Among the finds discovered here that testified to the horror was this Roman sword, the Roman gladius, found on the tunnel floor. Nearby were cooking pots, clay lamps, and coins of the revolt, with the Hebrew words, Herut Zion, freedom for Zion. 2 words that expressed the heartfelt aspiration of the Jews who hid and were killed here in the drainage channel in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. It is possible that the death of these people in the depths of the ground was preferable to the horrors suffered by their brethren who were taken captive. The prisoners were sold into lifelong slavery or died in blood sport, fighting against wild animals and gladiators. In pain, shock, and sorrow, the Jewish prisoners are marched through the streets of Rome. And before them go the spoils of war from Jerusalem, the golden menorah, and the holy vessels of the temple. Rome celebrates its victory with a parade, with huge monuments and a special coin that glorifies and commemorates the suppression of Judea. Jerusalem, weeping and mourning, descends under layers of ash and destruction. After 5 years of persistent struggle against the strongest empire in the world, the Second Temple is destroyed.
Oh, I don't need that. All right, so that's not the best video for describing all of this, but it was pretty good. Like, you kind of got a picture of it. Now, were any of you able to like figure out how long all that took? Like, that's like, we're talking years and years. Like, I think it was like 5, something like that. Like, that's that whole thing that we watched. Can you imagine having to live through all that? It would be awful, right? That video is also very sanitized and stuff. Like, there's the one section that talked about how there were children walking in the streets because their parents had died of starvation. I'm sure that happened, some too, but also families would turn against other families and turn them in. It's like, hey, here's the rebels and like all that stuff. People would eat other people's children to survive. Yeah, I mean, this is, if you know anything about siege warfare and what happens in those cities, that's what happened here. And so it's all these things, kind of like compound onto each other. And this is happening 40 to 80 years after Jesus. Like that, not long after Jesus said the words that we are going to read in Mark chapter 13. And I think Jesus is prophesying this because he sees what's going on. He's already seen people, which I thought it was interesting that video used the word zealot, that people are trying to avoid the zealots. What does zealousy mean in that sense right then? It means that there are people that are like, let's fight at all costs. Oh, you're a defector, you're trying to get away, kill him, type of thing. And so be careful of like the zealousy and all that stuff. And did you even notice that the Jews had crafted a coin? Freedom for Zion, right? That doesn't sound familiar today. Let's read. So, all right, let's read. So Mark chapter 13, we're just going to hit that a lot here, a lot of it. We'll see where we stop. So as Jesus was leaving the temple, one of the disciples asked him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." Again, what happens right before this in the Gospel of Mark? The lady giving out of her poverty, right? That's important. Sometimes we separate that. So like, you should, if you're just reading this through, you'll be like, come on, guys. Like, you're looking gross here. Like, that's verse 2. "Do you see these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." Interesting. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, and John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us when these things are going to happen. And what will be the sign that they are to be fulfilled? And Jesus said to them, watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, famines. These are the beginnings of the birth pains. All right, so what the other videos that I found did a good job of doing, that this one didn't, this one just focused on Jerusalem. There was a whole thing that got to Jerusalem. So you remember 150 years before this, the Jews successfully kicked Greece out. They especially kicked the Greeks out. And so that's like burning inside of them. So they start having revolts, and they actually successfully got Rome out of Jerusalem. And they started kicking Rome out of all the little towns all throughout Judea. Well, then Rome came back to win, right? And just came right back all the way and basically kind of surrounded Jerusalem with all this, like cutting off everything else. Basically, there was so much zealousy for freedom for Zion that Rome was finally like, I've had enough. Like, we need to show you guys who's really in control here. And just went through and destroyed the place. So much so that Israel was wiped off the map until after the erosion of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. Like, that's when the state of Israel came back, when a bunch of guys in Europe decided to parse everything out. And they created Iraq, Iran, all that stuff. That's all old Ottoman Empire. And so they continue on. So there's this zealousy for freedom of Zion, right? Like over here. And I think Jesus is pointing to that, and he's going, watch out, because you're going to start hearing stuff. And when you start hearing that stuff, you need to understand that that's the beginning of the birth pains. That's the beginning of it. As soon as you start hearing those things, that's going to be the beginning of it. Because Jesus, remember, he's the Son, he's not the Father. He doesn't know when this stuff's going to happen. But he probably can see it happening. Like, you guys are on a road to destruction here. So, verse 9, you must be on your guard. You'll be handed over to local councils, flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before the governors and kings and witness to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you're arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what you say. Just say whatever is given to you at the time. For it is not you that are speaking, but the Holy Spirit. I tell you, that coin to me said a lot in that video, that whenever people start talking about like that freedom for Zion thing, that's moves of zealousy and like trying to find perfection. It's like, who's really for us and who's really against us. We see the disciples doing the same thing already, right? Like, Jesus keeps fighting the disciples. The disciples are like, these people were casting out demons in your name, Jesus, and we told them to stop. This stuff is already existing, right? We told them to stop. And Jesus is like, what are you doing? If they're not for us, if they're not against us, they're for us, right? Like, what are you doing? Stop looking for like the perfection out there in all these people. And you can see that it's all weird apocalyptic language, but it's all kind of interspersed in through there that he's talking about stuff. So then he starts saying, verse 12, brother will betray brother to death, and father his child. Children rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Like, so that brother will betray brother, like that starts, you think about sieging and being attacked and all that stuff, and like it all sounds really familiar. Now, remember, Jesus is saying this before all this happened. But I think he's talking about this mainly, but he's talking about truth in general going forward type of thing. So I don't think Jesus all of a sudden is like, this is what the end of everything will be like. I think he keeps going. It goes back to that place with Jerusalem and the sack of Jerusalem there, because the disciples are like, look at these big walls. Let's continue going. When you see the abomination that causes desolation standing there, it does not belong. Let the reader understand, and let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. Does anyone know where abomination of desolation comes from? That's a quote from somewhere else in the Bible. Does anyone know? Revelation, that wasn't written yet. But what? In the prophets, Daniel. At once Daniel gets into the apocalyptic stuff, it's over there. So here's the thing. An abomination that causes desolation is usually when worship of the true God is no longer allowed. So when something happens to the temple that stops worship of Yahweh, the true creator, when that stops. So like when Babylon came in Daniel, that would have been an abomination, caused desolation. When Alexander the Great came in, Alexander the Great he just conquered. He didn't care about what people were doing religiously, really. But when Antiochus Epiphanes was in there, he stopped all worship of Yahweh in the temple and converted it over to Greek gods. And that's how we got Hanukkah. It was like they retook it again. But that's that Daniel language here. And you can see that this destruction of the temple is definitely that. I mean, because what sits where the temple is now? There's something there. Do you remember? What do you know? What sits where it's the Dome of the Rock. It's a high holy site for Muslims. Like it's been there thousands of years now. That's well, maybe not thousands, but you know what I mean. Like long time. Dome of the Rock. So they can't, you can't just go, let's just build the temple back in Jerusalem and make everyone happy. You can't do that. Because if you do that, you're going to have this entire other sect of major religion in the world get very upset. So where do Jews, they worship in the synagogues, but they have the Wailing Wall now, right? Which was it the north wall? I can't remember. Of the temple. It's the last thing that kind of remains of the temple. And so they do the prayers, and people will put prayers in the wall and all those things there. So the temple being destroyed in CE 70 or AD 70, whatever you want to call it, is an abomination that causes desolation. Because worship stopped in the temple. Worship stopped from God. And so that's quoting Daniel there, and Jesus saying, it's like, the abomination of desolation is coming in, and that's what it means. So flee to the mountains. So verse 15, let no one in the housetop go down and enter the house or take anything out. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful will it be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in winter, because these days the distress will be unequaled and all that stuff. He's talking about warfare here. I loved how that video depicted when they showed up to Jerusalem. That's all of a sudden that army was there. People had probably been hearing for months. It's like, oh man, that town was sacked. Oh man, And as they were in the outskirts, they were probably like, oh, like that's just that town. We're in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, we have the three walls. We have all this power around us. This is where God's temple is. God will never allow the temple to fall. Even though in the past. But anyway, he'll never allow the temple. You can hear people saying that. You can also hear when people are sitting in Jerusalem and other places that false prophets would start popping up. Like, if you would just pray harder, then God will save us from the Romans or whatever, right? You can hear that. You know that's happening. And Jesus is talking about it because he knows it's going to happen, right? So let's continue on. Let's see. Verse 19. Because in those days, let's go to 20. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or look, there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time. But in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. That's from Daniel, I believe. Does someone have a note in their Bible where that's from? It should be Daniel. So they're quoting it to Revelation? So the sun will be darkened and moon to blood is a Babylonian reference to like everything just kind of crumbling down. Because everything in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, hinges around Babylon coming in and taking over. I mean, you see all the prophets, like all that stuff. That's what Daniel's about, all that stuff. So when we talk about like a big superpower now, like Rome, Greece, all that stuff, they are a Babylon, right? And so by Jesus quoting, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and all that stuff. And then when John of Patmos quotes it in Revelation, the readers would understand. It's like, oh man, this is talking about Babylon. This is talking about Babylon and the sacking of kind of God's people in the holy things, like just that kind of full sense. Yeah, Gloria. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the judgment. Well, yeah. So I don't think that would be entirely two different things. Like judgment of God in a nation coming in. I don't think that would be, by me saying a nation coming in, I'm not necessarily not saying that that's the judgment of God. Does that make sense? So like that's because like when you look at the prophets in the Old Testament, like they are talking about the judgment of God coming through Babylon and all of those things. That's definitely a sense that would be done. And also at some point we'll have to go through Revelation. Revelation, I think, I could be wrong about it. But Revelation talks a lot about Rome and Rome's power. Like you look at a lot of the scary things in Revelation that come, and they're allusions to Roman gods. Like you have like mention of like stars and and like morning stars and stuff like that. That's all. It's like Aries and stuff like that. So there's all this allusion to these Roman gods, because Rome is big, bad, and in control. Killed Jesus, right? I mean, Jerusalem had their own way of doing that too, but Rome is kind of the big bad Babylon at the time, and so yeah. Yeah. So concerning the judgment of God, I wouldn't divorce those two with what a nation is doing versus what that judgment too as well. Because I think what Jesus is getting at is I think he's looking out and he's going, you guys are going too far with this. Like, and this isn't going to end well for you. Like you're wanting all of this. They're trying to lift him up to be this leader like Judah Maccabeus, you know? And I think he's saying like, it's going to happen. Like you're going to start hearing all this stuff and you're going to be destroyed because you're wanting all these things. So let's continue going. So verse 26, at that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds. The four winds means from the four corners of the earth and the ends of the earth and the ends of heaven. Verse 28, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. So we're going back to the fig tree now. As soon as the twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. I think he's looking around and he's going, this is all going to be destroyed, guys. Like, be careful. Be careful. 2 summers ago, we did a sermon series here called the Acts one, the Spirit experience is what we called it. We went through the book of Acts. And the biggest thing I walked away with studying through Acts was its anti-zealousy message. Like it was so like you get about halfway through Acts and the rest of it reads just like the Gospels. And it's like, stop being a zealot. Stop being a zealot. Serve the people around you. Like that's serve the people around you. Take up crosses. You know all these things because and that's Paul's message. He's like, I spent years in prison. You know, I spent all this stuff in prison. Stop being a zealot. And I think this is the biggest thing that I get from this now, because if you're trying to be a zealot, so these people are trying to be a zealousy for the idea of Jerusalem, the idea of freedom for Jerusalem, what that coin said, idea of freedom for Jerusalem, idea of getting Rome off their back and all that stuff. They became a zealot, and it ends up destroying them. And that's I think that's what he's saying here is like I think he's saying like, I'm looking at the fig tree and I'm seeing this, you know, that it's coming. So then verse 32, and about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. So be on guard. So he's saying, I don't know. I don't know these things. I'm just the Son. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house, he puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. And therefore, keep watch, because you don't know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. And I think that watch there at the end says a lot. I think the watch is look around. Look around. Look at what you're doing. Look at what you're doing. And so, and when you look at the very next story, I think it continues to be telling that the very next story is someone giving away basically a year's wages to anoint Jesus' head. You know, like it's someone that's not, they're not protecting just what they have anymore. So I don't know, does anyone have any questions or anything? You don't have to agree with me in what I'm saying here. I'm just saying if you want to be right, you have to agree with me. Like that's but I'm trying to give a different perspective here. Now, one thing that I will say about this is I think that this pertains to back then, but I also think it can be moving into things today too, because that's kind of how prophecy works. That it's kind of it's both the now not yet type of thing, the now not yet. And so I think us today, it's easy to fall into the same traps that the Jews were falling in the day, where they're desperately looking for a Messiah to save them, to finally save them for whatever they think their perceived enemies are around them. They're desperately looking for that. And I think Jesus' message to the disciples is the same message that we need to hear. It's like, stop looking for that one over there. Stop looking for that one. He says there's a lot of people who are going to come looking like me. Like they're false prophets. They're false prophets, right? And so stop looking for that one savior that finally he's the one that can get it, you know? Like that's and all that. Be careful of the zealousy, because you're just going to destroy yourself. I think that pertains to this day. But what he also says, and I think this is the part that we miss sometimes, he says, you know, be on your guard, be alert, and watch. But he also says, no one knows the day or the hour. There's a comfort in that. Because I think it's funny when people are like signs of the times, or like reading the tea leaves and like all that stuff. It's going to happen on this date and time and all that stuff. I think there's a certain comfort in going, okay, God has said he will watch over us. So we don't have to be overtly zealous. You know, we don't have to be overtly like, we got to fix everything, right? We can rest in him. We can serve those around us, and we can watch and be on guard that we don't fall into the same traps that Jerusalem fell into in that time. All right, I'm done talking for a little bit. Who was? Yeah, Carol. Yeah. I think that's that now, not yet type of thing. Like that's, yeah. I think trying to decide how much heresy I want to say. I think the fact that this is in here and that there's other people that could probably see the writing on the wall when this is written down, and most likely this was written down not long from the Jerusalem thing happening. You know, these weren't like people writing down like, what did Jesus do today? You know, there was some years afterwards, right? I think the author is wanting us to see this. I mean, it could be. It could be. Yeah. Yeah. I think that understanding of the end of the world type of thing could be understood a couple different ways. I think when you talk and read in history from people that have gone through real scary tragedy, that they kind of describe it as an end of the world event. And you think about like the siege in Jerusalem, I mean, what does it take to eat that you have to eat somebody else? Yeah. Like that's what's that take inside your psyche? You know, what do you have to lose before you get there? Yeah. And so when we're talking about the end of the world, like I think you can kind of wrap that in it as well. Like, so that's, and the reason why I'm making a big deal of this, like we're so quick to go full apocalyptic from where we are now that we miss that I think a lot of this pertains to something 2,000 years ago. And that's, and the reason why I like that, because here's why I think that. I don't know if this is going to make any sense or not. Let me see if I can make sense of it. When it's an abstract in the future, we can make it be whatever we want it to be. So it's like, oh, this is all happening and all that stuff. But when that stuff was talking about an event that happened, there's much more direction for us going forward as we look at something maybe happening again. So I think that's why that now, not yet is a powerful idea. That so, no, like I think Jesus is looking right at this. Like he's looking, like you got to remember, they were trying to lift him up as king on Palm Sunday. You know, they are trying to make this happen right when he's around. It's only going to get worse as it continues on, you know? And I'm not saying the Romans are the righteous ones in there. Like they are Babylon in this story. They are the awful ones, you know, like they are the beast that comes from the sea. Okay? So they are that. And so but Jesus he's wanting them to build a foundation that's not on sand. And if you build a foundation on, we're going to defeat these people because these people are messing with us and all that stuff, I think he's saying that you're building it on sand and you're going to be destroyed because the waters of all that are going to come up. So when we look at our own future and the end of everything and all that stuff, I think it's about building on the rock of Jesus. And I think the rock of Jesus is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two things. So I think this is all talking about in the future too, but I'm trying to get us back into the past to hopefully give us a little clearer vision for the future and stuff like that. So I don't know if that makes any sense. It'll make sense in like 6 years for you. Like, how about that? Like this is something that I'm not 100% there in understanding everything here, but I'm starting to work out the picture in my head. And so it just takes, kind of going through it and looking, but we can't forget what comes before and after this. And that's what I'm trying to do too. Like all of what everyone is doing in Jerusalem to have Jesus say this, and then what the authors do right after this. Like you got Jesus anointed in Bethany, you got Peter's denial, like you got all these things that are apocalyptic in their own nature, So you can't divorce this and go, well, this little bit here suddenly talks about all this stuff somewhere else. Like that, it's all located in this book. It's all located in this story, and it makes sense in this story. So don't completely divorce it out of the context of Jesus saying it when he said it, type of thing. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah. So that's the thing. Coming up, I'm going to start saying some things, and hopefully it encourages me. All right, we're done with the study now. I've already written not this week's sermon, but next week's sermon as well. Can you believe it? I'm a whole week ahead. You know why I'm a whole week ahead? Because my buddy Mark decided to go on vacation next week. And so we had to get a sermon ahead. That sermon, not this weekend, but next week. This weekend it's a good idea too. It's really cool, but that one has an idea in it. It's something that I think we've been talking about in our studies here the whole time, but it actually puts it down into words really well. And I'll give you a sneak peek of it. The main thrust of the idea is usually we make our religion about what, and Jesus has us turn it to who. All right? That our religion, our hope is all in who. And so we move from what to who. So that's really cool. And if you want to try to write the sermon on your own, we're using the Good Samaritan to say that. Well, hopefully I can communicate it well, but I was like, ooh, this is a big idea. There's just ideas that we come across, we're like, ooh, these are big ones. The zealousy in Acts was one of the big ones for me and stuff like that. So this is a big one coming up in 2 weeks. But cool deal. Did anyone have any last things? I talked a lot on this one. Sorry about that. Anyone else have anything? All right, cool deal. Well, may God richly bless and keep you all, that you all would know that God loves you so much and he's always with you. Amen.